a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching outside of the sphere.
Roger. There's troubleshooting as soon as I
get. So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Hi everyone and welcome back to That UFO podcast. It's your breakdown for early February 2022. Joining me as always, we've got Dan. How are we doing today?
I am great, thank you very much. We've got lots to talk about, lots happening.
We have. Dan, you're looking sharp on your screen there.
Literally, the camera's better.
The camera is literally better because you've got your new MacBook. So no longer is there going to be steam coming off it as you spend 12 weeks rendering a YouTube video.
No, hopefully, I mean, I'll be paying off for a while yet, but I think it'll pay for itself over time. We should be able to produce just more content for people, especially with the Colombia trip. So it's great to have to help me with that.
Yeah, so that's a must-have, and I upgraded the PC. I posted that on the Patreon, so anyone who does support the podcast, thank you, because you've helped us do that, and I've upgraded the PC so it goes a little bit faster. I'm going to start taking on some of the video editing and doing some other little bits and pieces myself as well. It does make a big difference to getting the content out. I actually do have a new camera as well, but it's been in the packet for about 3 or 4 weeks now, because it's a bit more fidgety to set up, but it'll be better than this webcam. You'll see a bit more of the illustrious background that I have and all that. But yes, thank you to everyone that supported and everything else. A lot to get through in the show we've got today, Dan. So Chris Mellon's article has just dropped on the debrief.org. Why is the Air Force AWOL on the UAP issue? We're going to start off with that. We're then going to look at Jim Semivan's appearance on Coast to Coast this past weekend. A lot of cool nuggets of information in there. Jim Semivan doesn't do a whole load of interviews, unfortunately for us. Maybe that's one for the bucket list this year. We're going to look at Havana Syndrome, which is something that still pertains within the media, even the mainstream. That's not going away. We're then going to finish with one of your now famous, Dan, as I'm calling it, no one else, James Webb Telescope updates, because you'll be talking about the mirror alignment that's happening. That'll be a short but sweet segment. We'll then tell you about a UK UFO report you can get through our friends at ufoidentified.co.uk, and then what's to come with the rest of the podcast as well. But Dan, let's get right into it. So a little unexpectedly, Chris Mellon, former Undersecretary of Defence, as we know, a huge proponent and advocate of the UAP issue, as he has been these last years especially, released an article on the Debrief, as I said, titled, Why is the Air Force AWOL on the UAP issue? Pretty damning article in terms of it's almost an attack on the US Air Force, which Chris, being a patriot and an American himself, will be no light thing for him to call out, but he does it in a pretty incredible fashion. As we record this, Dan, I've spent a whole day recording, doing podcast stuff, as you know, took a day off work for it. And I've done an interview with Tim McMillan, which we were recording for almost 3 hours over 2 sections. And we go into this in a lot of detail. So around mid-February, Valentine's Day, how romantic, that'll be released. It'll be up early and ad-free, early access, all that stuff on the Patreon and things from today. But we go into that in a lot of detail there as well. Obviously, the Debrief has that working relationship now with Chris. But yeah, what did you think then when you saw this dropping?
It's amazing. Like we've been waiting since Biden signed the bill, we've been waiting for the next kind of carrion call, where to focus our attention. And I feel like Chris, this article could have been headlined painting a target for people, because he's reminding us as a community through the Debrief that the Air Force is not playing ball still after 70 odd years of it. And he's also getting to the right people who probably Gillibrand and people like that, and reminding those guys that there was language in the bill that basically says for every report now that's coming out, so October 31st when the first new office report comes out, they've been directed to name and shame people that aren't people and organizations that aren't playing ball. So this is kind of the opening shot of that, I suppose. And Chris takes no prisoners as he tears through that and accuses them. And I think I would agree, rightly so. Wonders if they're even responsive to some kind of civilian oversight.
The first thing that took my attention was Chris Mellon. Are we to believe that the US Air Force did not detect any UAP from 2004 until 2021? This lapse in US Air Force reporting raises doubts about the credibility of the Air Force on the UAP issue and its responsiveness to civilian oversight. Chris Mellon's calling out the US Air Force at that point, because the way I feel the tone, and I said this to Tim McMillan of the article, it's almost like you're scalding a child that you know has done something naughty, and they're keeping it secret, and you know they're lying to you, and they're continuing to lie to your face, but you talk down to them almost. And I would be shocked if you were doing this, and I'm really disappointed if this is the case, and almost calling on them to rally on their pride a little bit by saying, well, you must have saw something. I mean, have you not? Look at all this equipment you've got. And he talks about just the unclassified stuff that he can talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
And he lists a few of those. The Space Fence, which is the world's most advanced radar, tracking over 25,000 objects in orbit, reportedly some as small as a marble.
That's a crazy system, right? And we know some of the radars around the Princeton and stuff like that had similar capabilities. They could track tiny objects.
He talks about the solid state phased array radar system, which is there to detect ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, or sea-launched missiles at the US. Again, talking about these it's not their job, but they would pick up objects like Tic Tacs and others coming in potentially. The Global Infrasound Acoustic Monitoring Network, which is there to detect pressure waves in the atmosphere for detecting nuclear explosions, monitoring North Korea, countries like that. The US Space Surveillance Network, the Space-Based Infrared System, active electronically scanned array radars, the Federal Aviation Administration, and other surveillance systems. Chris Mellon's rhymed off a load of things there, not including all the other really, really good stuff that we don't know about, that he does know about, but shouldn't. And he's basically calling out that, come on, Air Force, you've got all this stuff and you're picking up nothing. You're clearly lying about this and withholding information back. So for me, it's shots across the bow from Chris Mellon to the US Air Force, Dan.
Yeah, definitely. He even points out that the Air Force train in the same areas as the Navy. So where all these incursions and encounters have been reported by the Navy, the Air Force is kind of pretending they haven't seen anything in the same areas, which is, again, a bit crazy, right?
Let me ask you then, Dan, the Air Force, if you're reading into this article the way I think we should, Chris Mellon saying when those events happened in 2004, the Nimitz Princeton, or you can look at the Omaha, the what was it, the Russell?
Yeah.
There was a few of those other events again.
Those, yeah.
I've been recording all day. My brain's a bit scrambled, folks. Apologies. But all of these events that we know about involving the Navy, there should have been surveillance equipment from the Air Force that picked up these incursions as well. So if you're the Air Force, and many or most of this equipment, I imagine, sees this stuff in real time, the Tic Tac event happened over, was it 7 to 10 days? It wasn't a one-day thing. I think a lot of people can forget that it wasn't that Fravor saw a Tic Tac, they chased it, bang, Graves saw it. They were there for days. Sean Cahill, Gary Voorhees saw these guys, Kevin Day saw these things. Were the Air Force just watching? Were they ignoring? Were they monitoring and taking data? What do you think, Dan? And it is just pure speculation at this point, but what are the Air Force doing when they see, look at all those things just sitting off the coast of that nuclear, powered fleet?
To say that the Air Force wouldn't do anything in that situation is insane. That's their remit, to investigate those things, to keep those airspaces safe. And the pilots have a way of reporting now. That's been set up. That was one of the first things to happen as the bill kind of came about and things like that. So for them to just not report anything, Chris also pointed out that the last known location of the USS Princeton's missing radar data was not only said by the personnel on the ships to be taken by Air Force officers, but also that it was last reportedly in Langley Air Force Base. So it certainly seems they're corralling all this data. The question is whether they know everything and they're keeping it from us, or they know nothing and they don't want to look incompetent. a lot of these organizations don't like saying I don't know. So I think that the truth usually is kind of somewhere in between those extremes, right? So
Yeah. Do you know what it reeks like to me, to try and use an analogy here that people, I hope I make this clear. Imagine, Dan, you are working your way up as a hotshot lawyer and you're doing pretty well. You're on one of the upper tiers of your pay grade, okay? And the bosses of Dan, Andy, and co are Dan and Andy, okay? And you know that within the institute they're doing some dodgy things, dodgy practices. There's institutional bullying, all that kind of stuff goes on. But they are the main guys. You can't touch them. They're untouchable, and for you to speak out and do anything is just going to be detrimental to you. I feel the Air Force see these UAP as there's nothing we can do about these things, and to acknowledge their existence and try and do anything is just going to make us look weak and be detrimental to us. So the best thing for us to do is turn a blind eye and just get on with what we do. And anything we can do, we use it to our advantage. And I feel that's sort of the way the Air Force are acting in all of this, that they're turning a blind eye because there's nothing we can actually do about what's going on. We can't match what these things can do. So let's just leave it and do our own thing in the background. Is that fair?
I'd say so. And this whole time, those officers, they're gonna have other stresses, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether there's a lot going on in the world that they're going to be focused on.
Well, look at right now, we've got Ukraine and Russia on the borders.
Exactly.
So as much as we love the UFO issue, there's other stuff real time going on that's more pressing to them.
We even had a report that off the coast of Scotland there was an unidentified aircraft, and everyone jumped on it as a UAP. And then when you read the article, it turned out it was a Russian thing, or Russian plane.
A shipment of iron brew coming in.
But I thought that was a really good example because that spread all over the news like wildfire, and we knew it was Russian. So if there are no flags on these things, why aren't all of these events spreading over the news in similar ways?
Yeah. Dan, I'm going to ask you a question here. Can you think, let's be fair to the US Air Force for a minute and give them a moment that we're going to be positive about them potentially. Can you think of a good reason why the US Air Force is right to behave the way they are on this subject? Why could they be holding back?
I'd recommend people listen to our Tom DeLonge profile show because I feel like the answer could be in that kind
good
of
plug
musings. Yeah. But the idea that this is such a paradigm shift that, Lou said about the word somber, that's how much it would cause people to reflect. Tom has been terrified, and he's talked about that story of, not knowing if reality was reality to him anymore. And there's also law that kind of says, there was a deal signed, and this is kind of the more extreme side of things now, but there was a deal signed between Eisenhower and the visitors, and we kind of have essentially a countdown and a mortgage, right? So I could see a scenario where maybe I'll also mention the hitchhiker effect, because that seems to stick to people that experience the phenomena. So if you kind of open the floodgates and go, everyone, this is real and you can experience these things, suddenly you've got a whole planet full of people experiencing hitchhiker effects and no answers for them. That's kind of scary. And if that's the situation, I can see, I can empathize with that. Maybe revealing the secret makes things worse and they had to be ready. But they're not playing ball now that we've gotten to the point where we can talk about it. So I wonder if that's even close,
Yeah, Chris Mellon goes on to say, I have a theory, about which I would like to be wrong, that the Air Force is so accustomed to a lack of civilian oversight on UAP issues that it hardly takes such oversight seriously. Perhaps civilian policymakers are also so accustomed to blanket US Air Force denials regarding UAP that they don't think to challenge the Air Force any longer. That's a pretty incredible claim, but I don't think it's necessarily that shocking that the Air Force is that. I'm trying to think of all those teenage movies I've watched, the college quarterback that even the school teachers are scared to do anything about because they're so important, they're so big, they're so powerful, they're so popular, and you're better just to let them kind of do what they want because it's not really worth your time and hassle pulling them up.
In those movies, the quarterback always gets in trouble and they always get involved in the end. So, if there happens to be anyone from the US Air Force listening, please just join the conversation. No one will be mad, it'll be a constructive conversation.
Yeah, and that article again, I would encourage people to go and read it. I know from speaking to a few people that Chris Mellon has been working on this for a few months. It's not something he wrote out overnight when he was bored. He's a busy man, and a lot of thought has gone into it. There are a lot of hyperlinks explaining various different things as well, and it's got a fantastic amount of knowledge within there. So
And
I
a
suggest
great bunch
people
of
do read it.
questions too,
Yes.
which I actually emailed over to Susan Goff because I figure, what the hell, she'd be great to ask these questions too. So if I get anything back, I'll share that on social media and on here.
Have you got a favourite question, Dan? Here's a good one for you. There's 14, isn't there?
There are a
Questions
lot of
asked.
questions, yeah.
There's
Um,
questions within the questions as well, actually, as well.
yeah, like for me, they're all important. I'm not gonna pick one just because they all kind of piggyback off each other, right? And they're all addressing things that Chris has brought up in the article. So if anyone gets any answers to any of these from the Air Force or from Susan Goff, it'll be very, very informative.
Dan, I've got a favourite question.
What's your favorite question?
It's really sassy. Question 6. Is there a problem with the F-22 sensor system? If not, how is it possible that Navy fighters with inferior sensors were routinely detecting UAP off the east coast of the US for years, while US Air Force F-22s operating in the same training areas did not? If it was simply a matter of Air Force pilots' fear of retribution, what does that tell us about the Air Force culture? And what are you going to do going forward to encourage rather than punish openness and vigilance? That comes from a place of knowledge that I think many of us are at now, where we know that people are scared to come forward still. Maybe it's less so in the Navy with the procedures and protocols put in place after the task force report, but it looks like Chris Mellon's calling out that, well, we know there won't be a problem with that sensor system. You just have pilots too scared to come forward and you need to fix it. That's what I read into that one. So I love the tone. This isn't one of those articles. It's not a blog. It's not Chris Mellon sharing his thoughts. This is there for people to read. And I don't mean us. I think we've said this before, haven't we? That in some of Chris Mellon's blog posts, they're not there for us to read. They are aimed at a section of people he knows are paying attention and he knows are reading those. And I feel this is exactly the same.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. Chris knows the big movers and shakers in this would be the phrase, I guess. And yeah, the language is very much aimed at affecting, or maybe bringing certain points to the conversation between those people.
Yeah, so go and check that out, folks. The link will be in the description of this podcast. If I remember, it will be. It will. But yeah, really, really interesting article from Chris Mellon. Love to hear people's thoughts on that one. Online, via email, ufouapam@gmail.com, or any other way you can get in touch with us. Dan, you're going to take the lead on the next one. We're going to look at Jim Semivan and his appearance on Coast to Coast over the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jim Semivan went on to kind of open up about all things TTSA, and how he met Tom, where this conversation is going. I'd highly recommend people go listen to it, but I'll just hit on a few highlights for you here.
Can I just say, I forget he's a co-founder of TTSA.
This was one of the things I was going to remind people of, because he shared a story that I'm not sure has been fully shared before, but he basically said that him and Tom got involved because Jim read Secret Machines and heard some of what Tom was saying and thought, oh God, this guy's clearly informed. I'm going to go talk to him. So they had a conversation, and Tom proposed the idea of Jim joining the company. And Jim said, no, he wasn't interested. He was interested in researching the phenomena, not the entertainment side of things. And that was when basically at that table were a number of people that Jim didn't share the names of, but Hal was there. And that was where, on the back of a napkin, they kind of sketched out the plan for TTSA, and it was formed there and then. It wasn't long after that Jim apparently put Tom in touch with Lou, and they had a call. And then, he got a message at like midnight, 1 a.m. From Tom saying basically, yeah, I've employed Lou. He's joined us now. I thought that was a real interesting little tidbit in the timeline. It kind of clears up one of the gaps I had in my notes for Tom DeLonge Part 2 profile. But yeah, I thought that was interesting, because people have wondered if Lou was involved earlier and before he resigned, and it just doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah.
It's no conspiracy there. It's
Well,
just
well, that's something we talk about, don't we, on Tom DeLonge Part 1, for people who
Yeah.
haven't checked out yet, is, there's so much of what Tom says on early interviews on Jimmy Church and shows like that, where it's a source I had and I was banging on the doors and and we were wondering, was Lou one of those doors? And it doesn't seem like he was. Lou came on at the time, it kind of looks like he did, and there was nothing untoward or sinister going on in the background at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And it speaks to what we said as well, where TTSA, as we know it now, was the plan B. Plan A went away when WikiLeaks happened and all those names came out. And Jim says
original
that
team.
he only found out Tom's advisors because of WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks. That's Dan's new website, WikiLeaks. Check it out. Yep. Get your WikiLeaks hat. And that's the kind of stuff we're going into in detail in part 2 of the Tom DeLonge discussion, because that will basically be the TTSA kicking off the A team, the B team that we got to know as the A team.
Yeah.
And then those couple of years of TTSA with unidentified and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to go into that in detail. Something I was really interested in, again, and I know this has came out before, but the fact that Jim Semivan, and as he says, his wife are experiencers.
Yeah,
this is a pretty heavy hitting guy to come out and say, I've had these experiences. He talks about the going to a UFO conference. Yeah, I'm just double checking the note I had.
That's right.
Talks about going to a UFO conference in Virginia Beach, and he tells a gentleman about the experience he had. And basically, they was told you have a classic. They don't say abduction experience, but classic experience. And he wrote down a few of Jacques Vallée's books for him to read, and that started his journey into. Yeah, you've had this experience, and here's a little bit of how to make sense of it, I suppose.
Yeah, and it wasn't Jim and his wife's only experience as well. He says that in 2018, they had a hooded figure visiting in his bedroom. He said it looked like a mini Death Eater. And after reporting it, he was told to kind of try and make contact. And in this interview, he says, like, there's no way he's going to try and make contact with something that looks like that, which I think is fair enough. But yeah, not the one event, many events. And he specifies that he and his wife are still being studied, and that's why he doesn't like to talk about these things in depth. Which, there are only certain avenues that can study this stuff. So I'd be curious to hear who is studying him. I wonder if there's an MRI involved.
And you know what, as well, I think this is one of those where, and we know people on social media particularly, he won't mind me saying it because I've interviewed him and the interview's out there, but John Davies, who was, classically annoyed at lack of representation for experiencers. Here's a pretty well-respected, credible, heavyweight individual, not just in terms of UFOs, but in his positions that he's worked in and the people he's worked with. And he's calling out that I'm an experiencer. I've had multiple experiences. Like you say in this, we're still being studied now. We've had experiences as recently as a couple of years ago. And yeah, so this is what you're going to get. I mean, there's not too much higher you can go before you start getting to presidential levels of you need the presidents to come out and say they've been abducted or had experiences, and you're not going to get that. So this is happening. This conversation is moving forward, and people can correct me and please get in touch, but were these same individuals coming out at this rate back in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, making these claims on these kind of grand stages? Of course, there was no social media, but this for me is a massive step forward, especially for experiencers. Although I can't talk as an experiencer, I can appreciate how frustrating that must be. But these are people kind of hopefully putting that word out there and moving that conversation forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And people will be glad to know that Jim specifies that they're still going to be doing the science stuff and the CRADA, but they're just focusing on entertainment for now because of cash flow. There's no timeline, but when the funding comes, To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, which is now called To the Stars Inc., will go back on and do the science kind of research with the phenomena. I think people thought that was going to stop when TTSA shuttered, but it seems not to be the case. We also have news that the TTSA podcast is going to be coming back as well, with perhaps Peter Lavender, which will be interesting because he writes the Gods, War, and Man books, which are not so fictional. It's kind of looking at the phenomena through a historical lens and bringing in some very esoteric areas of discussion as well. Including DNA. So if anyone is interested in the DNA discussion and the hybrid discussion, have a read of the second book of Secret Machines, because there's a lot in there for you.
They also point to a few names quite prevalent. Dr. Colm Kelleher is discussed. Of course, he's just done an interview with Kurtjai Mungal along with George Knapp on Theories of Everything. Check that out, folks. It's available now on YouTube. Same with our interview with them from a couple of months ago. Also, John Ramirez is brought up, and Jim Semivan backs up John Ramirez's credentials, but also what he says, doesn't he?
To be specific, he backs up his credentials and the FOIA direction that John gave. So not to give anyone the impression that he backs up that they're reptilians and stuff like that. But yeah, that is, he says to listen to John, and that he gives out good advice when it's the harder stuff, not the speculation.
To be fair, I asked John, as we record this, part 1's been released, part 2 is coming out this Monday, that you've got to differentiate between opinion and knowledge. And I think John was quite fair in his responses that throughout that interview, including in part 2 that people will hear, this is what I think based on my own experiences. And there's probably more of that within John's conversations than here's what I know because of where I worked and those conversations. So I think it probably leans quite heavy towards John's own experiences and opinion, but he's got a platform because of his background, which, to be fair, is the same for Jim Semivan. And because Jim Semivan coming out and telling us he's an experiencer is one thing, but Jim Semivan with a 25-plus year CIA career behind him is another. And that's just how it works, isn't it?
And distinguished CIA careers as well. These guys just weren't, filing or anything. They were fully, sleeves rolled up, mugging in, doing intelligence work. So there's no wonder that they have a lot of knowledge between them. I would expect, a couple of years back, we only had Jim. Now we've got Jim and John. And I would expect more people to start coming out of the woodwork and discussing this now. Because a lot of the younger generation that are in these organizations, be it the CIA or politics, they see this as a really important issue, and the cat's out of the bag, and they're discussing it now. So even if the higher ups want to keep it secret, tough. People are talking about it.
And one of those people originally that talked about it was Bob Lazar, and Bob Lazar is brought up, of course. It's a George Knapp interview with a big name, so if Lazar's going to come up at some point. And Jim Semivan again says he sees nothing to say that Bob Lazar's a liar. He acknowledges he could be lying, but doesn't think so. And that it makes sense, and I've got the note here, it makes sense why they hired him. Look at Snowden. This is a quote. Look at Snowden. We hired him. No college degree, but a very smart kid. In my opinion, he's a traitor, and they hired him. Calls Lazar a Zen mind, and when a project gets stuck, they bring in someone completely different, completely new, to give a new perspective. And maybe someone that had those personality flaws, if you want to call them, of a Bob Lazar, and we've discussed this before, including with George Knapp, is the person you bring in, because there's that plausible deniability.
Yeah,
it's like bringing in me to be an expert in something that, he's flawed, and the guy who has silly little UFO podcast, yeah, but he knows this. Yeah, but he's also the guy that you go, if he ever goes to the papers or the press, yeah, so UFO nut Andy McGrillen, and that's how it would be positioned. But it doesn't mean I didn't do what I was brought in to do. And I think that's to be Bob Lazar potentially, because I've always said I still lean much more towards Lazar telling the truth in a lot of that story. Not all of it, but a lot of it being correct. And I would say there's probably reasons why some of it isn't true.
Yeah, I would agree. I always struggle with the Lazar thing. That's a unknown plate for me that just spins. But there's a lot there, like you say, the Zen mind thing, bringing in someone with plausible deniability. He was a larger-than-life character that was showing off rocket cars in the local paper. You can, that's someone that you can easily write off under plausible deniability. But with Bob Lazar, we also have like two pools of information that he gave us. We had the stuff that he says he saw and experienced and worked on, and then we have the stuff where he was put in a room, given a file, and that's all the Zeta Reticuli stuff and things like that. So there could be a little misinformation muddy in the waters there for that plausible deniability as well.
Dan, anything else you want to add to that one? Obviously, this is something we want people to go and check out themselves. Subscribe to Coast to Coast. I'll again give a shout out to Joe Murgia, who does a wonderful job transcribing. It's a 64 or 65 mega tweet thread that Joe Murgia managed to sit and give. So if you're just looking for those kind of highlights, then check that out as well. But certainly go and listen to the full interview if you can. Anything else you want to add?
I think only Bodies and Craft brought up. And in response to it, Semivan kind of stutters and says,
"Yeah, he doesn't answer,
there.
does he?"
George jokingly says, "Well, that says a lot anyway." So thank you for that.
Yeah. Did Semivan not answer in a similar way a similar question when he was on with Brian Keating and Tom DeLonge?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, gets that sort of awkward. Not for me. Not going there. So
which might mean nothing,
Yes, you've got to say
it could mean everything. So
yeah,
take
it probably means he's seen the bodies in the craft. No, you can't say that.
His car boot, right? That's
yeah. But there's probably good reasons for these people to give the answers they give. So I think we're so accustomed to no comment, or I can't discuss that because of an NDA, meaning well, it must be true, and that's not always the case. So he's not giving an answer. It's a non-answer.
Yeah.
Just to touch on it again, we want people to go and watch it. Kurt Mungo is a friend of ours now, especially from professional point of view. He's great to talk to, and he's just had George Knapp and Colm Kelleher on Theories of Everything. I've only caught bits of it. It was bedtimes with the kids when it was on live. So you managed to make some notes on it, Dan. Any particular points that stood out for you?
It's a good job you didn't watch it with the kids. There might have been some stories that were scary for them. So
yeah, probably.
Good call. The Dino Beaver isn't soft and cuddly to everyone.
The baby caught some of it, but he's not got a clue what's going on. So that was fine.
Or he knows everything and can't communicate it. It's one of the two. So there was a lot of conversation about the hitchhiker effect, and that kind of opened up a little bit. You mentioned Jonathan Davis earlier, and I saw that he was ecstatic in the chat because it was mentioned that black helicopters showing up kind of could be part of the hitchhiker effect. And I know there's a lot of discussion around UAP disguising themselves as different objects, be it commercial airliners, clouds, black helicopters, and we actually got some conversation about it here. It's time coded, so I recommend people go listen to it, but it was very interesting to hear that multiple people had experiences with black helicopters passing overhead that were unmarked. It could be, I think, we have the idea of the phenomena being able to give us kind of holograms and screen images in our heads by manipulating our consciousness. So maybe that's it, reacting to people's expectations of what they expect to see overhead or making people nervous. It's very interesting. I wouldn't like to say definitively what it is, but I know it's in a lot of cases. I also had the pleasure of having a question asked. I asked Colm and Knapp what people haven't spoken about from the books that were really interesting. Knapp answered by basically emphasizing that this is OSAP was probably the biggest study of the phenomena in history with the US government. 22 million doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot more than we thought was being put into it, which was a big fat zero. It generated huge databases, nothing else like it in the world at the time. Valet created them, and they were going to be using AI to kind of sift through them, and we know that's where the conversation's going now. So it seems they could have just funded OSAP properly a while back, right?
Yeah.
Then Colm emphasized that the OSAP wasn't just about Skinwalker Ranch. It was a minority of cases from Skinwalker Ranch. They brought forward 104 separate reports that were submitted separately, and only the minority was on Skinwalker. A lot of them were based around different places. He brings up a few reports of UFO experiences with black triangles and things like that that were really intriguing. And he also emphasizes the fact that they had to get 3 Russian translators to translate all the material they got out of the Soviet Union. For me, I've never been big on that stuff, but what Colm said kind of brought me round a bit on it. And they really went hard on it. And they found a unit. I don't know if I hadn't seen this before, but Unit 73790 was apparently kind of the DI-55 or the A-tip of the Soviet Union. So have a gander if people are interested in that. One last thing, because there's a lot here, would be, we've heard about Axelrod in the book before. But Colin points out here that he was the primary, or considered the, and this is the language he uses, the primary infectee for the hitchhiker effect for those around him. I thought that was a really heavy phrase. He took it 2,000 miles back home with him in Virginia. Within a few weeks, both his wife and son had experienced effects. A few months later, neighbors reported them, and even school kids that his children went to school with were reporting strange creatures in their bedroom windows and outside their bedrooms and stuff. I just get myself chills. So yeah, it's there's a lot to like in that interview, and I thought Kurt did a fantastic job.
Yeah, please go and check that out. That's Theories of Everything on YouTube. You'll see they've just hit like 150,000 subscribers, and it's only going up. So yeah, I've still got my Theories of Everything hoodie on. I've been recording in this week. So yeah, and one thing to segue nicely onto the next section is they do talk about Havana Syndrome.
I literally was just going to say, can we do that nice segue? Because
yeah, I'm always on top of those.
Very good.
Havana Syndrome is something that it was picked up on and talked about in the last year and a half, and it's never really gone away, and the mainstream media seem to pick up on it quite frequently as well, including some of the big publications. They write regular articles on it too, and that's not to say it's necessarily always phenomena rated or related, but I spoke to Tim McMillan about this today, and he gave a really interesting idea that he didn't necessarily go down the route, and I won't spoil it. I want people to listen to the interview, obviously, but he thinks it may be a byproduct of some sort of monitoring that might be going on. Again, if it is Russian or Chinese spying, for example, or US spying, let's lump them all in together, that it's something that's coming off as part of something that's happening. And that's what's making people sick. So maybe like an unintentional side effect.
Yeah.
And
I
potentially
think so.
That's why the latest report that came out, I think, was it CIA? I can't remember, said they didn't think it was a foreign adversary. And he doesn't quite believe that is the case.
Yeah, we had that CIA report saying that they could explain the bulk of them, and there were a few that could be a foreign adversary, but they weren't willing to go that far. And then we had a new US intelligence community report this week that the study found that pulsed electromagnetic energy, particularly in the radio frequency range, could explain the characteristics and or some of the core characteristics, the article says, associated with Havana Syndrome. I'd love to see those core characteristics and how much they cross over with some of the core characteristics of the sixth observable. Because like Lou pointed out a while back that these things could be very different but have similar signatures. And I think science is getting to a point where we can kind of start to play with these things, and it might be in the same area-ish. Non-ionizing radiation is a scary thing to play with, and it would be better if we could get control of that and figure out what this is.
Yeah, and maybe that is the case, that there are instances of Havana Syndrome related to, like Colm and others have said, a side effect of being in close proximity to UAPs, UFOs. But also it could be a side effect of other processes and things that are happening from a intelligence gathering point of view, or sophisticated weapons, sensor systems, whatever they may be, that again are having similar side effects and causing these kind of strange things to happen, like Thomas Winterton.
Can you remember some of the, while we were talking radar way back when we were first getting into the Tic Tac conversation, and what those radars could pick up? I remember someone explaining that basically if you aimed the radars and the arrays at a bird, it would just cook it, basically, because of the energy being thrown at it. So that's a really good example of an unintentional consequence of a technology that's perfectly reasonable to use, the radar tracking. But yeah, side effect is it fries the bird if you aim it.
And again, those waves carry on for however long and whatever distance it may be. And yeah, so interesting, and it's interesting to see that still being picked up and reported on. So let's keep on top of that one. Dan, your James Webb Space Telescope update. What's happening with the big mirror up there in the sky?
So the James Webb is about 1 million miles away, 1.5 million kilometers for you folk who aren't accustomed to miles. They are now doing the mirror alignments, basically. I don't know if you remember that when the Hubble went up, there was kind of a mess up, and the mirrors, they had to go up and fix the mirrors, basically. This time, instead of something potentially going wrong and them having to fly and fix it, because it's a lot further than the moon and it would be hard to do, they made it so that all of those mirror sections are on servos and they can kind of flex and bend them as they need. So what's happening now until kind of Mayish summer is they're just aligning all those mirrors. So at the moment, everything's out of focus. They're still receiving, there's photons hitting the detectors. There'll be data being generated, but it's all going to kind of be like looking, almost like if I take my glasses off and kind of start looking at things, and they're getting the glasses on it. So we'll see the first images it should be about summerish. And you can actually go to the James Webb data repository and download these images. They just don't come in a format like a JPEG or something like that that'll work on your phone. You've got to get special programs. They are free, but yeah, have a gander if you're into that kind of thing.
Yeah, keep an eye on that stuff online, folks. Like, there's going to be nothing coming through in terms of images till the summer. I saw today on Facebook someone reporting that it was an image of Jupiter and 2 of the moons that was filmed by Cassini in one of the flybys. And it was like a time lapse of images that were taken. Beautiful picture. And someone was like, here are the first images from the James Webb Telescope. And it was like quite a few people quickly jumped on that saying, nope, that's not the case. And to be honest, I don't think that's what we're going to be getting from the James Webb Telescope anyway, is it? It's going to be looking a lot further out. It's not a probe flying past planets. It's a telescope sitting out in the void, looking into deep, deep, deep space, and looking back in time pretty much.
Yeah. And with certain light as well. I don't know if people know this, but when you see pictures of like Venus and Jupiter and things like that, they're all artificially colored. So Venus, people consider it gold. It's not gold. It's like a white kind of marble. But the astronomers kind of, they make it a bit more dramatic because Venus is meant to be a hellscape, so they make it look like a hellscape. And it's true of all the planets in the solar system, kind of except ours, I think. But
it looks better on
seeing it.
It looks better on one of those little school setups, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah,
look at all the different colours. Yeah,
exactly. Easier to remember when they're like that. But yeah, it'll be like infrared or ultraviolet light and things like that, and then they pick the color hues based on it. So yeah.
Are we totally separate question, Dan? This is one I could ask you after, but I'll ask it now because other people might be thinking the same thing. It was only in the last couple of years I really realised that we don't really have any proper pictures as we know it of other planets or things in space. They're always either artist interpretations, CGI, or like you say, things that are kind of filled in.
Yeah.
Are there any actually good pictures of other planets that are accurate that we aren't filling in the details ourselves?
You can find them. They're just kind of buried in the archives because the more dramatically colored ones catch on with the public's imagination. Yeah. But they are out there, and there was an article a couple of weeks back where someone put a few of them together. So I'll try and find that, and we can put the link in the description so people can see what the planets really look like. Because you just kind of think, wow, maybe the Earth is flat. Not really. I'm kidding. Don't be mad at me.
No, we know it is. But yeah, no, it's definitely not. And also, I just want to add that our friends at UFOidentified.co.uk, that's Ash and Co, who put on the fabulous Minicon in Preston last year, myself and Graham Rendell attended, they've got the UK UFO report up, which was published on the 1st of February 2022, and it's our annual report looking at all the sightings data for reports made during 2021. So check that out at ufoidentified.co.uk. And I think later in the year, I'll be popping along to their conference when it's announced, so keep an eye out on that one as well, folks. I think Dan's going to make an effort to get to this one too.
Yeah.
I imagine Graham and stuff.
Last year. So absolutely.
Some then what's to come, folks, on the podcast. So as we record this, it's the 4th of February, and lots to do. I've literally spent the day, as Dan knows, doing podcast stuff all day. Took the day off work to do this non-stop. So available from today is that's Friday the 4th on Patreon, on Apple Premium or Spotify Premium. That's the paid subscriptions, not like you pay Spotify, but you sign up for the $1.99 or $2.99 paid subscription. You can hear Tim McMillan's interview over a week early. That'll be uploaded over a day or so in 2 parts because it was recorded in 2 parts, and we'll be discussing with Tim what happens during his quote-unquote downtime, which is a lot, I can assure you. Debrief article on Chris Mellon, we go into that in more detail. We talk about anti-neutrinos and baiting UFOs, and there's a whole lot more in there as well. We had a really, really long, deep conversation, and the listener questions section was fantastic too. Went into some more controversial questions that Tim gave he answered everything, but there was some stuff people were kind of really inquisitive about knowing in there as well. So check that out, folks. This weekend also, Tom DeLonge Profile Part 1.5 will be available, where we discuss your points, thoughts and questions from our Part 1 profile of Tom DeLonge. And it certainly proved to be one of our most popular shows for a long time as well. Big hit on the YouTube. Let's see if that's just because lots of people still thought it was an interview with Tom DeLonge, even though we said it wasn't and we called it a profile and everything else. But yeah, part 2 is still not an interview with Tom DeLonge. I'll give a quick update on how our interview with Tom DeLonge is going. They are still not getting back to us.
And they've also cancelled their tour now, so Tom's not even coming to the UK, which on one hand may mean he has more time for interviews, but on the other hand, he's going to be on a different time zone to us, and he might be a little bit less receptive to that.
Yeah, if you're listening, Tom, it would still be great to have you on. He's probably not listening. Mark, Travis, can you tell Tom to come on? That would be great. So part two, where we discuss those early years of TTSA as we knew it. It's flame burned all too bright too quickly, but it had a lot to accomplish in a very short time. That'll be out as well. On Monday the 7th of February on the free feed, John Ramirez Part 2 is out. Thank you to everyone who's checked out the interview in full already on the premium services. And finally, Dan, you are off to Colombia on Monday the 7th of Feb. You're meeting up with Vinny this Sunday in Brewdog in Birmingham, aren't you?
That's right, yeah. So Vinny's going to be in Brewdog in Birmingham from 1 p.m. So you can meet up and have a chat with Vinny. I'll be coming along at about 5 p.m. because I got a later bus. But after that, we go to a hotel, hole up for the night, and hopefully get an early night because we have 5 a.m. flight. But by Monday evening, we'll be in Colombia with Ashley Cowie and the team. I'll start sending you updates and about what's happening out there.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to those updates. Look forward to kind of catching up and seeing what happens while you're out there. There's a whole lot of content already in the can, and Dan and I are doing one last recording tomorrow to make sure there's plenty to come out still while everyone's away. I've got interviews lined up with Professor Simon Holland, which I've announced, and you can send over questions already. Check out Professor Simon Holland's YouTube channel to email the questions to ufouapam@gmail.com. I know that's one Dan's looking forward to as well. And Kevin Randall, we're just working on securing a date and time on his new book on Leveland, Texas, in the event of 1957 too. That'll be pretty much it for February. We start to hit March at that point, and I will look to drop over listener call-in slots as well for the next week or so while Dan's away. So if you can email me with the subject listener call-in, that would be great. A few people have already. Fantastic. I will try and fit you in as best it accommodates your time zone and mine. Dan, that's all for the breakdown. So until next time.
And well, I guess I'll see you when I get back from Colombia. Just before we finish out, I just want to say thank you to everyone that donated to the raffle over Christmas. Lou and I just finished out all of the calls with people who, either bid for them or made such a big bid that Lou wanted to take time to call them. And there were some really productive conversations and some really great ideas from the people who entered the raffle about the next fundraising this year. So thank you to everyone who helped us raise $24,000 for charity, and just keep an eye out for news on the next round of fundraising.
But don't worry, folks, I'm not leaving the country. I'll still be here in the UK. I'll still be cold. I'll still be working. And until next time, speak to you soon. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFOUAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little Baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative game of state full on meta. You can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. Jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys, they thought this was noise, they thought it was a dream, they thought it was my toys, they thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? But if we're being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your